Atlantic. And Barry Grissom is a former U.S. attorney. Thanks to all of you for joining. Barry, the resident former prosecutor here, let me start with you. So you have this report from the Washington Post saying that if Michael Flynn ultimately says President Trump or someone immediately around him committed wrongdoing, the strategy will be to say that Flynn is lying. You have Trump's lawyer now out there saying this is garbage, this is fake news. What do you make of that denial? Do you take that as this strategy is off the table? How do you interpret that?
Well, the strategy really is Defense Counsel 101. I mean, there's no adage in the law that when you have the law on your side, you pound on it. And when you have the facts on your side, you pound on the facts. When you have neither, you pound on the table. And what it sounds to me is if this effort to discredit General Flynn is really, as I said, a very basic defense tactic. When lawyers make representations to their client that certain things will end by a certain time, the only lawyers in the team that knows anything about when something is going to end are the prosecutors, because they're the ones who are collecting the evidence, they're compiling their witness statements, and they're doing their work in front of the grand jury. And I think it's very risky if you're a defense counsel and you tell your client that an investigation is going to end by a certain time certain.
Well, Jonathan, Barry makes the case that in one sense this is lawyering 101, and it certainly makes sense to me. If someone goes and accuses you of a crime you don't think you committed, or you don't want people to know you committed, you say the person's lying. The Trump lawyer, though, today coming out and saying that report is fake news. What do you make of that?
Right. Well, they have to. They're not going to say, oh, actually, yes, we have this great plan to undercut Michael Flynn, which we're going to deviously roll out over the next 6 weeks. The interesting thing to me is when that story ran, Ty Cobb declined to comment. So he had an opportunity to deny it in the story, and he didn't. But just sort of pulling back, I think a much more interesting point is, and it's a question that a lot of people close to the situation are asking themselves, is why did Mueller allow for this prosecutorial vulnerability? Because that's what it is. He could have charged Flynn on any number of things, and he chose to make it this one thing, lying to the FBI, which really does give a very big free kick to the opposition. They can say, well, he lied about this, he could lie, how can you trust anything he has to say? So it actually is a clear vulnerability for the prosecution.
And Julia, in terms of the timing here, I think one of the questions this raises is, are we looking at just sort of a basic potential legal strategy, a contingency scenario that the Trump team is preparing for, or is there a more specific reason why they're now talking about this apparently? Has something happened since that plea a few weeks ago that's changed their thinking about Flynn's role in all of this?
Well, I can't speak to the change in their thinking, but I think it fits overall with Trump's broader strategy, which is anytime he disagrees with somebody or he doesn't like the criticism leveled at him, he calls it fake news, and he attacks the credibility of the bearer of that criticism or that news. His administration has already gone after Mike Flynn. If you recall, Ty Cobb, one of the president's lawyers, the day of the plea bargain, of Mike Flynn's plea bargain, he referred in his statement to Mike Flynn as an Obama administration official, already trying to put distance between them. So I think this is maybe the least surprising news we've seen about the Mueller investigation. The other thing I'd say is that this is part of a parcel of, the broader Republican attacks on Mueller, on the integrity of the people working on his team, possibly preparing the base and, in general, the American public to not believe and to question the credibility of any indictments or conclusions that might come out of that investigation.
Well, as you mentioned, there is a precedent if this were to be the direction this ultimately goes, if the president, if his team were ultimately to be out there calling Flynn a liar. Wouldn't be the first time he's tried to distance himself from former advisors who've been ensnared in the special counsel's probe. You can take a look here at how the president defended Paul Manafort last February, then watch what he said in November after Manafort's indictment.
That's Mr. Manafort, who's, by the way, a respected man. And he said that he has absolutely nothing to do and never has with Russia. And he said that very forcefully. I saw his statement. Paul was not there very long. What people don't mention, Paul was not there for a very long period of time.
What was it that convinced you that he had to be let go?
Well, I think we found out something about he may be involved with certain nations, and I don't even know exactly what it was in particular.
Trump also would once praised his former advisor George Papadopoulos as an excellent guy. That was in an interview in March of 2016. Take a listen.
George Papadopoulos, he's an oil and energy consultant, excellent guy.
Then, after Papadopoulos began cooperating with investigators, President Trump said, quote, "Few people knew the young, low-level volunteer named George, who has already proven to be a liar." Barry, let me ask you, again, playing this out here, because we're on sort of, contingency, speculation here, but if this does go to a scenario where Flynn is saying if Trump committed wrongdoing, somebody immediately around around Trump committed wrongdoing, the vulnerability that Jonathan is talking about there, where Flynn has admitted and pleaded to lying to the FBI, if the Trump argument with Flynn implicating him then becomes, hey, this guy is an admitted liar, he's cut some kind of deal with prosecutors to save himself, to save his son, he'll say anything to get off the hook, he'll say anything to get off lightly, strategically, legally, how much success is a strategy like that likely to have?
Well, that type of strategy would probably be more successful if it were in a vacuum by itself. But what we have in this particular instance is, as your film clips just showed, we have the president being his own worst enemy. When the president vouches for General Flynn, even on the day that he was terminating him, as a good guy, as an honorable person, he's really his own worst enemy when we're talking about trying to affect the credibility of General Flynn. The thing that bothers me the most about this line or this strategy, if we forget for a moment Republicans, Democrats, what this really is, it is an assault on our institution of justice. Long after these folks are gone, I think I saw a Gallup poll that says 30% of the American people still believe President Obama was born in another country. This kind of assault upon the integrity of the Department of Justice, the justice system as a whole, is going to be an institutional wound that if a FBI agent is out there testifying someplace, there may be some folks who are still sitting on that jury years removed from now who remember this time frame and remember how this president attacked the credibility of one of the great law enforcement entities and agencies in the world. So that really bothers me more than just this president and these individuals. I think there is a much larger issue at play here than merely the personalities we're talking about today.
Jonathan, you are well sourced within this administration. We played and we showed some of the examples there of the folks around Trump who've been talking up the idea that this probe is not long for this world. It's going to wrap up soon. There have been some predictions here that haven't borne out. What is the current thinking? What's your sense of the current thinking in Trump land about where this is heading, about the timeline, about their exposure here? What's your sense of that?
Well, you have to separate Ty Cobb, the legal team, from the people inside the White House who really know nothing and they're just listening to the legal team with varying degrees of skepticism. And then you've got people in the close orbit outside, many of whom are more pessimistic. But I spoke to Ty Cobb about this a couple of weeks ago, and the way he laid it out was he says, yeah, the investigation will continue, and he uses the word silos. He said there are two silos, the Flynn silo and the Manafort silo, and they will continue, but the White House, that will all be wrapped up, and he's moved the timeline. He initially said Thanksgiving, then he said the end of the year. The last time I spoke to Ty Cobb, he said, early next year, but I can tell you, once you go one ring out from that, there is a lot of skepticism that this will be cleanly wrapped up with a bow, but by the end of January.
And Julia, the other wild card here is trying to put yourself in the shoes of Michael Flynn. He had his brother on Twitter the other day saying, "Mr. President, pardon my brother." You had Trump, until now at least publicly, and still publicly we should say, Trump's posture towards Flynn has been a pretty friendly and generous one. But now you're reading that, hey, look, they're worried you're going to say something and they're ready to go after you. What does this do to Flynn's thinking, his calculation, his strategy, or how he approaches this?
Well, again, I think it would be purely speculative, but if I'm Michael Flynn and I'm watching this guy throw me under the bus more, I might talk more. The other thing is, we have to keep in mind the issue of Michael Flynn is an important one, because if you recall, one of the reasons that Trump shortly before Trump fired FBI Director Jim Comey, he said he pressured him to go easy on Michael Flynn. So Michael Flynn also holds the key to a very important aspect of President Trump and whether or not he obstructed justice.
All right, Julia Yaffe, Barry Grissom, and Jonathan Swan. Great insight from all of you. Thank you for joining us. And coming up, Roy Moore's last stand. The Alabama Republican made a last-ditch effort to throw out the results